Hello, you. You're listening to A History of Italy. Special Regional Italy, episode number 4, Tuscany.
E non posso più accucciarmi e così ritorno su. Lascio i colli nelle valli, tra due salici piangenti. Io ritrovo la speranza di un amore che ormai fu.
This episode and related mini-series is made possible by our friends at Explore Worldwide, who offer small group adventures led by local tour leaders in over 100 countries around the world. Don't just travel, explore. Go to exploreworldwide.com for more information. So, I've recently added a city to my list of favorite Italian cities. Straight away, I have to make a disclaimer. I basically add every new Italian city that I visit to my list of favorite Italian cities, which you could say includes all Italian cities except maybe a chosen few which are really not that great. But having said this, there are a few which have something special, something peculiar or eccentric, and my recent addition is in this category. It is the city of Siena. My wife and I went there with another couple of friends to test a tour that I had created. This is my sort of third job after teaching English and podcasting, and it's a great way to mix business and pleasure. Every time I create a new tour for a city, we need to go and test it and take pictures. What a shame, eh? This meant that before going there, I had to study up on the city, and one thing that I found particularly interesting is the division into contrade, the different districts of the city. This division is not exclusive to Siena. Indeed, many cities all over, and even small towns, are divided into contrade, but they are often fading memories of a distant past, perhaps in place names that only the older generation can identify, and in historical reenactments. In Siena, on the other hand, these divisions are still very much felt, especially due to the fact that the various districts, the contrade, participate every year in the famous horse race known as the Palio. That word comes from the Latin pallium, which is a sort of banner or standard, and that is all the winner of the race gets, a standard with an image of the Madonna on it. Thousands of euros, uncountable time and effort and aggression go into this very short race every year, and all they get is a standard. And bragging rights, of course. There is nothing that raises the passion of the Sienese more than the Palio. Fights have been known to break out, and corruption of opposing jockeys is rampant, to the point that a special group of contradaioli, people from a specific contrada, are assigned to jockeys once they have been hired, for quite a lot of money, for the race, to follow him around constantly so he is not approached with proposals of bribery. If you're from Siena, your contrada is an essential part of your identity, and your relationship with the other districts can vary from alliance to neutrality and even outright hostility. Marriage with someone from an enemy contrada is frowned upon, and even spouses from friendly ones are known to go back to their family homes in the days leading up to the race. Some say this is one of the reasons behind the low divorce rate in Siena. The fact that the city hospital was built in one of the contrade was a problem that saw desperate grandparents rushing to the hospital with buckets of earth from their home contrada so that the baby could be born on home soil. You will be pleased to know that the hospital, as well as the cathedral and the main square, Piazza del Campo, are now all on neutral ground. As I was studying up on all of this and creating my tour, I thought I would like to get involved, at least as an external supporter. The question was, which contrada would I profess my faith to? There were a few that I liked, looking at the names and the symbols. For example, there was the tower, the dragon, the wave, and, as a laugh maybe, the snail or the tortoise. However, from the very beginning there was a sort of front-runner. You see, one of my favourite figures from history is Santa Caterina da Siena, St. Catherine of Siena, quite a formidable character on whom I've done more than one episode. You can still visit her house today, although it's not as it was, and has been transformed into a self-glorified version of the masculine church, cancelling out the female human aspect of Caterina's life. You can also visit the church that holds a relic of her mummified head, and under that the impressive Fonte Branda fountain. All of this can be found in the contrada of the oca, the goose. Soon after arriving in Siena on a stiflingly hot July Saturday, I realized that I had left my hat at home. Now, once upon a time, wearing a hat for me would have been more of an aesthetic issue. Nowadays, with my expanding bald patch, it has become something more of a health necessity. I thought that was the perfect chance to get myself a souvenir of a bandana of one of the contrade. I still hadn't decided which one I favoured, so I put off the decision, waiting for a sign. A little later, as we were passing a street-side cafe, my wife pointed out that it had one of my favourite beers, Goose Island IPA. That settled it. From that day on, I would be for the oca, the goose. Soon after, I went into a shop which was not in the contrada of the goose. Therefore, I very apologetically said, "I know I'm in the wrong contrada, but I would like a bandana of the goose." At that point, the second sign of the day arrived. The shopkeeper smiled at me and answered, "I'm of the goose." The deal was done. It did very briefly cross my mind that he may have said that to every tourist that wanted to buy a bandana of any district, but I want to believe that that was not the case. So, happy as a lark, or a goose, I stuck the bandana on my head and went off, wandering around the city, slightly oblivious to the nasty looks that some people were giving me. That evening, my wife, our friends and I went out to dinner. It is Italy, and in particular it is Tuscany, and even more particular it is Siena, so dinner was great. Afterwards, we decided to try and walk off some of the food by wandering around the streets of the city. In the distance, we heard noise of happy chatter, laughter, and clinking plates and cutlery. We headed towards the sound. At a certain point, we saw a staircase leading down, but some very rude young people had left their scooters in a line, so it was hard to get by. We made our way around them and down into the road. By that time, the sun had gone down and my goose bandana was happily waving out of my back pocket. We looked around, absolutely enthralled by the atmosphere around us, with table upon table lined along the street with people with maroon-coloured T-shirts and bandanas bearing the symbol of a tower. I stopped a young man and with an enthusiastic, happy, wine-fueled smile asked him what was going on. He gave me the information I needed. It was a celebration of the contrada of the tower, but he did not seem pleased at all to be giving tourist information, and he did not make us feel welcome at all. We headed out of the street, the two wives making it out safely when, at a certain point, I turned around to see the other husband was involved in a heated argument with a group of old ladies. They were aggressively telling him that we had no right to be here, and they would not at all believe that we had stumbled upon the event by accident. They were shooting particularly nasty looks at the bandana hanging out of my pocket. We quickly made our way out, having a good laugh about my rather large friend being bullied by old ladies. We also understood that the scooters had been there to keep us out. That evening, back in the hotel, a doubt started to creep into my mind. I googled the current relationships between the contrade, who was allied with whom, who was neutral, and who were arch enemies. There it was. The hated enemy of the goose is the tower. The next day we went to visit the top of the Duomo Nuovo, the new cathedral, with spectacular views of the surrounding city and valleys. You may be wondering where the old cathedral was, and I'll tell you about that in a moment. As we were admiring the spectacular view from the top, we heard drumming and trumpets down in the streets below, but could not see what was going on. We asked the guide at the top of the tower, and she told us that the contrada of the tower was celebrating their patron saint, Saint Anne. We asked her what contrada she belonged to, and she looked at my bandana, gave a half smile, and said, "I'm of the tower." She was very good-natured about the whole thing, but she did suggest that I should have chosen the tower, since their colours were a lot nicer than that of the goose. Still, I had not learnt my lesson. Plus, the sun was beating down on my poor head. A little later, we stopped for a late lunch at a cafe which had started off the whole matter. The one with the goose IPA. It was in the shade, so I retired my bandana to my back pocket again. As we were sitting, who should come parading round the corner in period dress with drums and flags but the procession of the tower? One of them glanced at the bandana hanging out of my pocket and said, "Look at this rubbish." It was that point that I finally realized that if I wanted to get out of Siena unharmed, it was time to put my bandana safely tucked out of sight. We made it out without a scratch, and my goose bandana now proudly hangs in my office. If you too manage to get out of Siena without doing silly things, you can venture out into the province and visit such picture book fairy tale Tuscan hills as Montepulciano and Montalcino, where you can go and taste the iconic Brunello red wine. Then, of course, there are the characteristic, almost lunar landscapes of the Crete Senesi. Another of my favourite destinations are the suggestive ruins of the Abbey of San Galgano, where you can find the sword in the stone. Considering we are quite far away from Camelot and Avalon or even Glastonbury, I'm going to go ahead and say it was a sword in a stone and not the sword in the stone. As we explore Italy in this mini-series, we are gradually learning that it is definitely not one monolithic and unified country with one culture, geography, history, or even language. There are great differences from region to region, province to province, town to town, and as this story shows, within towns and cities themselves. We mentioned the story of the Cathedral of Siena earlier, and that brings us outside of the province to the clash between Siena and Florence. Now, in general, most Tuscan cities and towns hated the Florentines, who would eventually, in the 1500s, unite all of Tuscany under the Grand Duchy, and spent most of their time before that trying to conquer everyone. Siena was one of the first cities in Tuscany to build a Duomo, a cathedral, in the 1200s, when it was a very rich city. As building continued and drew to a close, a nasty rumour started to circle. The Florentines had started building a cathedral, and the news was that, horror of horrors, that one would be bigger than the Sienese one. Without much hesitation, the Sienese Building Committee started on an extension to the existing and almost completed cathedral that would make it, at the time, the largest in Christendom. Then came the year 1348, and the Black Death took hold of Europe. In Siena, people were too busy dying to build cathedrals. When the horrors of the plague momentarily passed and the city got back to some sort of normality, the citizens wondered whether to continue the building project. They called in an architect, a Florentine by the name of Francesco Talenti, who persuaded them not to continue with the construction. That is why, if you visit Siena, you will see that at the side of the cathedral there is a section of external walls added on, the incomplete Duomo Nuovo. A final little quirk to the story was that when Talenti returned to Florence, he was hired to work on the Duomo there, and one thing he did was to make sure that the project was enlarged. That way, if the Sienese ever did complete theirs, it would never be as big as the Florentine cathedral. Now, Siena is one of the southernmost provinces of Tuscany, while Florence is up in the northern part. So, to avoid getting lost on our trip, we could use the help of a guide. That is where Explore Worldwide comes to the rescue. You could say that Tuscany is one of the corners of Italy that represents the quintessential Italian experience. The hilltop medieval towns, the rolling hills with winding roads, lined with cypress trees and surrounded by vineyards. The cutting board of cold cuts accompanied with a glass of Chianti. To explore all of this, you can't just go blundering through the region and stop at the first bunch of houses on a hill, or go wandering through a vineyard hoping that the farmer will give you a wine tasting experience. No worries, we've got you covered. This is a job for Explore Worldwide. For example, their A Taste of Tuscany Hilltop Towns and Vineyards tour takes you to southern Tuscany, Val D'Orcia, but with the adventure starting in the north at Pisa with its iconic wonky tower. From here, it's street market time in Livorno, and then to one of the most famous places in Italy for wines, Montalcino, to taste the above-mentioned renowned Brunello wine. The next day, it's off to Pisa for some cheese tasting. After all, as the Italian saying goes, you should not leave the table without the taste of cheese in your mouth. The fourth day of the tour takes you to one of my new favourite places in Italy, the mad and passionate Siena, where the annual Palio, as we mentioned, stirs up ancient rivalries between the contrade, the districts of the city. Then, of course, a Tuscan tour could not be complete without Chianti and olive oil tasting, taking you to the historic Volterra and the towers of the picturesque San Gimignano. Explore Worldwide's respect for local culture and the environment extends to finding local tour leaders who can get you off the beaten track and to the heart of your adventure, and their small groups allow for a more personalized experience you will never forget. Whether it's visiting a Roman villa on the classical tour in Sicily or a food and wine tasting tour in the hilltop towns of Tuscany we're talking about, Explore takes care of everything, putting the quality of their local tour leaders front and center so you'll truly understand the wow factor of where you are. If you're thinking about your next adventure, head to exploreworldwide.com to find out more. Don't just travel, explore. Go to exploreworldwide.com for more information. So thanks to Explore Worldwide, we have gone north to Florence, the most famous location in Tuscany. And indeed, so much has been said about the cradle of the Renaissance, the reawakening of the Western world, that there is not much we can add. I will, however, share with you my answer to the time travel question. I was some time ago interviewed on a show, Kids Talk Church History, which is hosted by a group of really bright, curious kids of varying ages from 11 to 17, more or less. At the end of their interviews, they asked their guests what period and where they would travel if they could travel back in time. As an Italian, I bent the rules and asked for an extra trip. The first was to visit my heroine Matilda of Tuscany, Countess of Cosa. Now, I hear you say, Mike, you can't just go sticking Matilda in every time you do an episode. It has to be pertinent. To which I would answer, she is pertinent here too, so there. You see, there was no historical or geographical reason why Florence should come to financially, politically, and culturally have the position of dominance that it did, with no access to the sea and being away from most traveled trade routes. But a part of that success comes from the fact that the Countess, her mother Beatrice, and her stepfather, Geoffrey the Bearded, favored Florence and set it as one of their bases of operation in Tuscany. So you see, I have every right to talk about her and travel back to meet her. The other occasion was to have a wander around Florence in the 1470s and 1480s, perhaps attending a banquet at the Medici Palace. Imagine being in a place and time where you could meet people like Lorenzo the Magnificent, Simonetta Vespucci, who may have inspired Sandro Botticelli, also around at the time, as his muse for The Birth of Venus, or again a young Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, or the poet Poliziano. That would have been the Florence at the end of the 15th century. We got to Florence following the rivalry with Siena, but surely we can find a neighbour around there who loves Florence and has had a nice, friendly relationship. Pisa, perhaps, which lies to the west. Well, there is a saying in Florence, and forgive me please for my bad Florentine accent, meglio un morto in casa che un pisano all'uscio, which means better a death in the family than a Pisan at the doorstep, to which the Pisan answered by saying that they hoped the wish would come true. Really lovely. Pisa first fell under Florentine control in the early 1400s, and from then on fought with bitter determination to throw off what they saw as an oppressive influence, even waging a war at the end of that same century that would last for years until Pisa, like the rest of Tuscany, would be gobbled up in the 1500s. This was quite painful for a city that had once in the Middle Ages been a powerful maritime republic with colonies all over the Mediterranean. Of course, the most iconic symbol of Pisa, as we mentioned, is its Leaning Tower. Building started there in 1173, but due to the weak clay and sandy foundations, started to lean when they got just up to the third floor of what was supposed to be a much higher bell tower for the cathedral. Legend would have it that now it stands because angels are holding it up so it doesn't fall. You will of course remember that Superman also came along after being exposed to red kryptonite and then straightened it up again after fighting and killing his bad self. Now Pisa did not just hate Florence, they were also not particularly keen on their northern neighbour, Lucca. While Florence bullied Pisa, Pisa bullied Lucca. The Lucchesi lost their autonomy and freedom to the Pisani back in 1314, after they had been fighting each other on and off since 1004. The sack of Lucca in 1314 was made possible by exiles from a faction of the same city, who included a condottiero, a military mercenary, Castruccio Castracani, a surname meaning dog castrator. This did not lead to a definitive occupation by the Pisans, but Lucca would never again rise to the same power and wealth. Lucca today still conserves its extensive circle of walls that it had built in an attempt to stave off the Pisans as well as others. You can walk around the city on them, and it's quite impressive, especially if you go in late autumn to the Lucca Comics and Games event and see the city invaded by cosplayers. I have a picture of my little Supergirl posing with Captain Marvel in front of the Cathedral of Lucca, for example, and Maleficent near the walls. Both Lucca and Pisa have little stretches of their provinces on the sea, but when we northern Italians head to the seaside in Tuscany, we usually go for Massa and Carrara in the north or Grosseto in the south. Having said this, in the province of Lucca, we also find the seaside town of Viareggio, famous for its carnival procession. Anyway, you could say that the Massa and Carrara seaside are a sort of fancy version of the more affordable yet better organized eastern seaside in Emilia-Romagna. The thing I particularly like about the Tuscan side is that their mountains give way in quite a short distance to the sea, so you can sit on the beach and look at the mountains, or choose each day whether you want to go hiking or sunbathing. Carrara, of course, is where the famous Carrara marble is extracted, and you can still visit some of the quarries today. This was the material used to make such masterpieces as Michelangelo's David or the Pietà, The Rape of Persephone by Bernini, or Canova's Three Graces. Heading south along the seaboard, past the little stretches of the coast of Lucca and Pisa, we get to the much larger stretch of Livorno, which also includes the island of Elba, which is where you go to in Tuscany if you are really serious about your seaside holiday with the beautiful beaches and nature. It was here that Napoleon Bonaparte was imprisoned before escaping and making his way to the continent to provoke the Battle of Waterloo. Further south, we reach the last Tuscan province, heading in that direction, Grosseto, where you can find one of my favorite seaside places, Orbetello. It sticks out, looking a little bit rude, into an odd land formation with long sandy beaches stretched out on either side of the rude formation to go on to embrace the Argentario Island. The long stretches are sandy and more traditionally touristy, while around the Argentario Island you have to earn your day at the beach by making your way down steep and winding paths, but it's worth the effort. Although the beaches are made up of very small pebbles, the water is crystal clear and the scenery, with the steep hills all around, is beautifully picturesque. A little bit further out to sea, you will find another beautiful island, l'Isola del Giglio, Lily Island. Such a gentle name, but unfortunately now tied to a modern-day tragedy, the wreck of the Costa Concordia cruise ship, which, due to a series of tragic and criminal acts of irresponsibility, negligence, and misunderstanding, led to the death of 32 people. In the province of Grosseto, there are also the very well-kept Roman ruins of Cosa, where you can see long stretches of walls, a Roman road, and even a very well-conserved villa. The name of the place, Cosa, means what, which quite entertained us with long and silly conversations such as, "What are we going to visit today?" "What?" "Yeah, what are we going to visit?" "We're going to visit what?" "Yes, that's what I'm asking." And so on. In the province of Grosseto, there is also a rather unique place, even for Italy, a huge sculpture garden known as the Tarot Garden, created by French-American artist Niki de Senfal. Each of the monumental sculptures you can go in and climb on was inspired by one of the tarot cards. It reminded me a bit of Gaudi's Parco Güell, although I visited it a lot later, so you could say Gaudi's Parco Güell reminded me of the Tarot Garden, with the sculptures made of ceramics, tiles, and glass, materials that change with the light and the seasons. The artist actually lived inside her sculpture, where you can see a bedroom and a bathroom. Since the artist was French-American, the bathroom was not equipped with the greatest achievement of modern civilization, a bidet. So, it is with the concept of superior hygiene that we have to say goodbye to our wonderful romp around Tuscany. Once again, we have not even come close to doing the wonderful region justice in all of its charming nooks, crannies, and famous sights. For example, I owe a deep debt of gratitude to Pistoia, where at the Pistoia Blues Festival I saw Bob Dylan in concert for the first time. Once again, with the help of Explore Worldwide, you'll have to come and explore for yourself. As always, thank you very much for listening, and until our next journey, arrivederci.